I declare this meeting open. Please, colleagues, welcome to meeting number 94 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I'll start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. For your information, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entire committee. And screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. So, pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, January 31st, 2024, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 8th, 2024, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-355, an act to prohibit the export by air of horses for slaughter and to make related amendments to certain acts. And of course, I would like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. We have with us today, with the Canada Border Services Agency, Graham Hamilton, Acting Director General, Traveller, Commercial and Trade Policy Directorate, Strategic Policy Branch.
You're going to have to help me with this. Texopoulos, is that right? Okay, and Director General, Commercial Programs, Commercial and Trade Branch. No stranger to this committee from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Dr. Mary Jane Ireland. Again, thank you for being back. You serve as the Executive Director, Animal Health Directorate, and Chief Veterinary Officer for Canada. And joining you today is Dr. Rick James Davies, Director General of Western Operations. So thank you both for being here. And we also have Ms. Shannon Nix, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy Branch with the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food. So thank you for being here today. Colleagues, again, this is a continuation of the study. We're going to allow for 5 minutes for opening remarks from each organization. And I'm going to start with the Canadian Border Services Agency. Over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, membres du Comité.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be able to contribute to the committee study on Bill C-355. We're here to share with the committee the roles and responsibilities of the Canada Border Services Agency in monitoring the export of terrestrial animals, including horses and animal products.
Dollars of legitimate trade and administers more than 100 acts and regulations at our borders. These efforts are designed to support the economic prosperity of our country while also keeping our country and Canadians safe. The CBSA plays a supporting role in verifying that other government department requirements are met for goods being imported or exported from Canada, as well as administering the Customs Act. Given the wide variety of acts enforced at the border, the CBSA works very closely with a number of government departments and agencies to ensure that the goods being imported to and exported from Canada are compliant with any act of Parliament that prohibits, controls, or regulates their importation or exportation. In the context of agricultural imports and exports, we work very closely with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which establishes the requirements for importing and exporting food, plants, and animals into and out of Canada. CBSA officers follow their guidance and instructions and will detain goods where imports or exports fail to meet the requirements under the Governing Act. This concludes my opening remarks, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. We'll turn it over to CFIA, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to appear before this committee as part of your study on Bill C-355. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency regulates horse exports under the Health of Animals Act and regulations. I would like to therefore describe the CFIA's current role in the process. The Health of Animals Act and its regulations establishes the requirements on the export of live animals. This includes the requirement that livestock, such as cattle and horses, being exported from Canada are inspected by a veterinarian and accompanied by an export health certificate that is signed by a CFI veterinarian. The export health certificate is a legal document confirming that the animal complies with the sanitary requirements of the importing country. The regulatory requirements for the humane transport of animals were updated in 2019. And the goal of these amendments is to prevent avoidable suffering of animals throughout the transport process by setting out the conditions for humanely transporting all animals by all modes of transport. Exporting a horse is a multi-step process that requires the CFIA to certify that the horse meets all requirements for Canada, as well as those for the importing country. First, the exporter notifies the CFIA of their intent to export a horse. Import requirements may vary by country, and many countries require that the horse begin an isolation period before it can be exported. During this period, the CFIA tests the horse to confirm that it does not carry any diseases that are of concern to the importing country, which are listed on the export health certificate. Once this testing is complete and the horse is found to meet all the requirements, a CFIA veterinarian provides the exporter with a signed export health certificate. The horse is loaded into a livestock trailer to travel to the airport. And at the airport, CFIA veterinarians confirm that the horse is properly certified, is not showing any signs of distress, and is fit to travel, and will be humanely transported based on Canadian regulatory requirements. Once a horse has landed in the importing country, the CFIA does not have any control or authority over its treatment and care. Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today on the CFIA's role in regulating the export of live horses, and I welcome any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ireland. Colleagues, the bells are starting to ring, but as this committee has generally done in the past, we want to make sure we maximize our time here in committee. So I'd like to ask for unanimous consent for me to use my discretion. I'll make sure that you have proper time. We'll vote during the period, and we'll make sure everyone's taken care of. But is that okay? All good? Okay, we'll now turn it over to any comments from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci de ma...
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for having invited me to participate in your discussion on Bill C-355.
Of horses for slaughter has garnered significant public and social media attention, and the Canadian public has expressed concern over the practice. Through the letters received by the Department from Canadians, petitions presented in the House of Commons, and public opinion polls, it appears that many Canadians are opposed to the practice of live export of horses for slaughter. In June 2021, petition E3187 was presented to the House of Commons. It is one of the most signed e-petitions on record, with over 77,000 signatures. More recently, petition E4190 was presented in February 2023 and garnered over 36,000 signatures. Comme vous le savez, ce projet...
As you know, this bill addresses the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food's mandate letter commitment to ban the live export of horses for slaughter. AAFC has been working closely with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Canadian Border Service Agency to analyze this bill. The issue is complex, and it touches on a number of key considerations, including legal obligations, international trade commitments and relations, acts and regulations involving animals more broadly, and mechanisms for implementation and enforcement. Given the complexity of the issue, I will provide you some quick data points and context that I hope will be helpful for your review.
Canada, in 2023, about 2,500 horses were exported from Canada for slaughter, valued at about $19 million. Foals aged between 6 and 9 months are sourced from Canadian horse breeders and transported to one of about 5 feedlots in Canada, where they're raised until about the age of 2. The horses are then flown overseas from Edmonton, Calgary, and Winnipeg. Once the horses reach the country of destination, it is the authorities in that country that are responsible for the regulatory oversight. Compared to other meat sources, such as cattle and pigs, the horse meat sector is relatively small and data is quite limited. As this is a relatively small sector with very little available information, gaps in knowledge do exist, including the degree to which Indigenous people participate in the trade. Within the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, we've been working hard to gather additional data and information to better understand the sector. As a part of the department's work to provide advice to the provide advice on the minister's mandate commitment, we reached out with CFIA to key stakeholders in the sector. We connected with most exporters, a major freight forwarder, several animal welfare organizations, individual producers, and Indigenous organizations. Our initial discussions with industry point to about 4 active exporters of live horses for slaughter in Canada. These exporters purchase horses from a few hundred producers and keep the horses on feedlots until they're ready to be exported. The producers operate many different types of farms. Some are far more dependent than others on the horse export market. While some horse breeders raise horses specifically for the live export market, it appears that most horse breeders supplying this market mostly breed horses for other purposes. Some of the producers told us that the export market provides a valuable secondary market to support their businesses. We will continue to engage and consult as needed to better understand how this bill can impact producers in the sector. From the correspondence that our department has received and from the conversations with animal rights organizations, it's clear that many Canadians view horses differently than other livestock. To conclude, I'd like to note that our department considers very carefully any policy change that impacts agricultural producers. As I noted at the outset, Mr. Chair, this is a complex issue. As Bill C-355 moves through the parliamentary process, we will continue to work closely with CFIA to identify any potential impacts and provide advice to the government to mitigate any unintended consequences. Mr. Chair, I hope this overview was helpful, and I welcome any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nix. We're going to do exactly that. We'll turn to Mr. Barlow first for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And it's good to have the officials here to shed some light on this presentation, this legislation. And certainly, I hope we aren't well, maybe we should start governing by number of petitions, as there's a petition in the House with 350,000 signatures asking for an election. So if we're going to go that route, I would say we better follow that one too. But to CFIA, Dr. Ireland, thank you very much for coming. And I want to highlight a letter from the previous Agriculture Minister to the Métis Nation of Alberta on this bill specifically. And the letter from Madame Bibeau at that time said, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is a science-based organization. Therefore, the agency would only ban the slaughter of the species on the basis of a significant body of strong, peer-reviewed evidence. In the absence of such a body of evidence, there are currently no plans to ban horse slaughter in Canada. Is the CFIA in possession of a strong body of peer-reviewed evidence to support the banning of the export of horses for slaughter or any other animal for that matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. So yes, the agency is a science-based organization. The regulations we have for humane transport under the Health of Animals Act and regulations oversee the export of and transport of animals into, within, and out of the country. And the aim of those regulations is to ensure that we do not have, that we prevent avoidable suffering. These regulations were updated in 2019 to reflect the best available science, international considerations, and after many years of engagement with stakeholders. The regulations are relatively new, and they do provide protections, enhanced protections for animals being transported. So I would agree with the question in terms of the sense that CFI is a science-based organization. We regulate based on information, and the regulations regarding transport were published in 2019, coming into effect in 2020. Thank you.
So with that in mind, then, in your opinion, Dr. Ireland, is this bill, this legislation, based on any scientific evidence of there's harm to these horses or any undue harm or risk to these horses? Is this bill based on any scientific evidence that you know of at CFIA?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't speak to the bill specifically. I will say that our rules ensure that animals are treated humanely while they're being transported. As part of the regulatory requirements, transporters are required to report to the agency when horse deaths or significant injuries occur as a result of transport, and that applies to any animal. The rules for horses, their movement, their transport, are the same regardless of whether the horses are destined for another country for whatever purpose, whether it's for show purposes, a competition, or whether it's for a feedlot. The same rules apply.
So we've certainly heard from evidence and from the proponent of this legislation that basically is saying that the Health of Animals Act and the CFIA are not protecting horses that are being transported by air. Would you say that statement is correct?
Mr. Chair, as I've said, the regulations were amended in 2019, and they offered additional protections and measures to prevent avoidable suffering in animals that are being transported. That includes horses, and there are provisions for air transport also. The regulations provide for adequate space, proper training of those that are transporting, as well as container closure and a reporting mechanisms to CFIA should something go wrong on transport that results in death or significant injuries. Mr. Chair, I have confidence in these regulations, but as I have said before during the study on electronic logging devices, transport of animals is complex and unforeseen events do happen. Contingency plans are required of the transporter, and there are times where the regulator and the transporter, the regulatee, must make decisions on the best interest of the animal's welfare.
Thanks, Dr. Allen. I just have two last quick questions, so I'm running quick on time here. But since the regulations were updated in 2019, have there been any fatalities with horses being transported by air? And do you have statistics on even the number of injuries for horses that have been transported by air since those regulations have been updated?
So, Mr. Chair, as we report forward-facing on our website since 2013, we have reports of 5 fatalities out of about 47,000 horses that have been exported. That's a mortality rate of about 0.011%. I'm not aware, Mr. Chair, of other instances of significant injuries. And the requirement for the regulated parties is to report mortalities and significant injuries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just for context, in that same amount of time, 250 pets have fatalities have been on airlines, so quite a difference in numbers. But to the CBSA, there is going to be an extreme new onus put on the CBSA with this legislation. Does the CBSA right now have the resources to take on what is being asked of it as part of this legislation? And does CBSA have any role as of right now in regulating the transport of horses?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. As it stands right now, I would just like to say I appreciate the question in the sense that the CBSA does play a very important role ensuring the movement of goods across the border, both import and export, and we are often the agency that is enforcing other government department regulations at that point of crossing the border. And so as it stands right now, as you heard from the testimony from my colleagues from CFIA, there's a very heavy role played by the CFIA in terms of the export of live horses. There's a lot of care and attention that is placed in the export of those animals by their officials in terms of ensuring that they accompany those exports to the point of departure and to the point of export as it stands right now. CBSA plays a very, very minimal role in terms of facilitating that transaction. The bill, as currently drafted, does foresee a role for the CBSA in terms of ensuring certain documentation is provided upon export, so that would be a new enforcement responsibility for the agency. However, we've not worked with the CFIA at present in order to define what the standard operating procedures and how that would actually play out at the border, and so I'm not in a position right now to articulate any further what sort of additional burden this would place on the agency and whether or not those resources are in place at present.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. We'll turn it over to Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank you here. This is not the first, nor certainly the last. It's very important to have you here. Mostly, as a committee, we've been doing more reports than legislation, and your testimony for those reports really helped shape what's going on. We really appreciate that. At the same time, when legislation comes, it's important because you are the ones that are on the ground. So it's really important for us to hear, and that's why I appreciate you coming and being here right off the top for this important study. Perhaps I would start with Ms. Nix, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Agriculture. You mentioned off the top that about the correspondence that agriculture has received. I'm sure that all of us have received this in the conversations, whether it's at home in our ridings, lots of petitions, many people talking to us. Can you give a sense of what the nature of that correspondence is? How much of that was supportive? How much was against it? And what were the common concerns that you've heard from Canadians, as we all have?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I noted off the top, it's an issue that's garnered significant attention. And the department has received letters in the order of tens of thousands, majority in support or in favor of the ban, and expressing a few common concerns. I would say stress and the size and type of the crates that the horses are exported in are the two kind of most common reasons cited.
Thank you. Can you also speak about some of the other countries, the other jurisdictions that have legislation similar to what's being proposed here in Bill C-355, and maybe insights on their rationale and their implementation process as well?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we are aware of other jurisdictions that have implemented or are considering implementing similar bans. New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Germany, and Brazil. For example, I would note in 2008, New Zealand banned the export of animals for slaughter. And more recently, they've implemented a prohibition on the export of livestock by sea. And then in December of last year, a bill was introduced in the UK House of Commons to prohibit the export of certain livestock for slaughter as well. And that, I believe, is at second reading in their House of Lords right now.
And since in the last few years, have you started working in conjunction with CFIA, with CBSA, on working towards, and if this bill passes, what steps you might take? Can you share some of that, the cooperation that you're doing and the communication you're having?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And Mr. Chair, I noted at the outset that data in this area is quite limited. We've conducted research on the horse meat industry more broadly. It's not an area that we had a lot of expertise in, and we've examined the considerations with respect to a potential ban. Consultations with various stakeholders have been really important in terms of gaining a better understanding of the impacts. And so we've spoken with representatives from industry, from the provinces that would be implicated, animal welfare advocates, and Indigenous groups as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. As the sponsor of the bill, I've spoke to many stakeholders myself, including exporters, and it sounds like you did too. There are about 4 active exporters, and you said there are a few hundred producers and breeders. Can you expand on the percentages? You said some are breeding for export, but most are breeders are for other markets, domestic markets. Can you give a sense of the scope of these people, the breeders that are selling horses? How much of that percentage-wise might be for overseas for slaughter versus domestic?
I would say that we know that about 2,500 horses were exported for slaughter last year in 2023. Those primarily going, or almost exclusively going to Japan. In context, I would say last year we exported about 10,000 horses to the United States by land. About a tenth of those were for breeding purposes. The rest were for sport and recreation purposes. I hope that gives a sense of just the differences, and maybe I would also note that to other countries other than Japan and the United States, there's probably a couple of handfuls of horses that have been exported, and we think that they've primarily gone by air.
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
I think I'm good for now because I would like to switch, and it would be
Okay,
hard to
well,
switch
maybe
with
we'll
this.
allow some additional time next round. Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, you have 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to witnesses for being with us today. I'm very sorry not to be able to be there in person. Your expertise is very good, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ms. Ireland, especially. She comes and sees us quite often. So I don't know who could answer first, but I have questions in terms of transport conditions, and I don't know who is best placed to answer. Are the conditions of transport of horses for slaughter very different from the transport conditions for those who are transported by air for other uses, other ends?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a very good question. The rules, the regulations for the transport of horses by air And frankly, the transport of horses are not different depending on what the horse is going to be used for. So the requirements for a horse to be transported to another country for the purposes of feedlot or food production are not different than the requirements for a horse being transported by air, for example, to an athletic event. For example, the feed water rest times or the interval between which an animal must be provided rest, feed, and water during transport are 28 hours, regardless of the outcome of that animal. Thank you.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ireland, for your very specific answers. So it's not different. So that means that if people in that field or people who want us to adopt Bill C-355 tell us that the transportation conditions are very different because they're in much smaller wooden cages, several animals together, that they would likely have less space to move, to absorb the bumps on takeoff and landing. That means that people who are transporting animals in different ways, for example, to go to a competition in a box where the horse is alone and there's someone accompanying them, so they are traveling much above the standards. Have I understood that clearly?
Some horses may be transported individually and some may be transported together. The requirements or the regulations, for example, for stocking density or space to avoid overcrowding in our regulations refer to the International Air Transportation Association live animal regulations, for example, which outline specifically the square footage that each animal must be provided when being transported. They also require that the animals be compatible, and there are some elements also of the container, how it should be built, what it should be made of, and what the specific details of the container are. So the regulations in some cases refer to International Air Transportation Association live animal regulations, but in the case of the spacing, they are quite prescriptive, depending on the size of the horse, obviously. The larger the horse, the more space per horse that should be provided. Thank you.
OK, donc je vous comprends bien.
So, if I've understood you, Ms. Ireland, people who transport horses in individual boxes are in a different class. They go above the standards. When you tell me that there are standards for the compatibility of animals, that was presented in several of the documents we've seen, where it said that horses are placed together in transportation boxes without necessarily checking the compatibility between the animals. Are you telling me that there is regulation on this and that is taken into account, or do you say that some associations have that kind of regulation to control it?
Maybe it's worth, Mr. Chair, pointing out what CFI does at the airport. In this case, the CFI at the airport ensures that animals are healthy, they're fit to travel, they are not overcrowded, and animals are compatible. We do a visual inspection to verify the horses can stand comfortably, naturally. They don't come into contact with their container cover when they're standing naturally, and CFI inspectors are present when the horses are loaded. When I say that animals, we ensure that they are compatible, we consider things like their size, making sure there's a relative uniformity in their size in a particular enclosure. So you don't have one very large animal, one very small animal, for example, that would cause issues during transport. But I think it's worth pointing out that CFI inspectors and veterinarians are at the airport when the animals are offloaded from the trucks, put into their containers, and put onto a plane to make sure that they are fit to travel, they are healthy, they are not overcrowded, and they are compatible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you for your clear answers. It's very enlightening what you're saying. So you check for physical size compatibility, but not the compatibility in terms of temperament, whether they would fight on the flight. It's hard to evaluate that in a few minutes before takeoff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So these animals have been raised together. They have been transported on trucks together. They're offloaded, and as they're unloaded into crates, the loading staff, as well as CFI veterinarians, inspectors who I've mentioned are present, work together to ensure that the regulatory requirements are met, that they're compatible, that they have the right amount of space, that they're in containers that are appropriate, and they're fit to travel. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Parent, Madame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perron. And Ms. Ireland. Now, Mr. McGregor.
Votes, so I'll stop you when 30 seconds before the vote to allow everyone to vote. I'll hold your time, and then we can make a decision on how we want to move forward.
Well, I was just wondering, could I complete my 6 minutes? Because there's a 10-minute voting period. Would that be okay?
As long as everyone's okay with that. We're all good? Okay, go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for helping guide us through this study. Dr. Ireland, I'd like to start with you and welcome back to the committee. Just as a counterpoint to the question that came from my colleague, Mr. Barlow, I understand science-based decision-making is very important. Our committee is we have possession of a letter that was written by 20 experts, veterinarians who have many years of experience in animal welfare and veterinary medicine. And I'm just going to read their conclusion into the record. It is, quote, "While the Health of Animals Act and regulations provide some protection for horses during transport, they do not prevent horses from experiencing some of the most severe negative affective states during transport or during transit. Because there are significant stressors inherent in the transportation of horses from Canadian feedlots overseas for slaughter, it is not possible to continue this practice without causing significant animal suffering." So I think it's important to just put that on the record, that there are people with many years of experience in this field who are raising very legitimate concerns, and that is based on their scientific assessment of the practice. I don't want to focus too much on that because I just want to go into your opening remarks where you said the CFIA is responsible for making sure that horses are meeting export requirements of Canada, but also the import requirements of the host country. But it's my understanding that when the horses land in Japan, that's where our jurisdiction ends. So if upon arrival in Japan, there is a discovery of injured horses, horses who have obviously had medical distress, how do we collect that data? Are we depending on the goodwill of Japan? Do they take it from that point? I'm just wondering how the oversight transition happens at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the regulations do require the transporter to report fatalities or significant injuries to the agency.
Even upon arrival?
Our expectation is that the transporter would report to us injuries and mortalities, even if the plane was landing in another jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So we would have several opportunities. In addition, we do have connections, communications with Japanese authorities. So there are a number of ways that information may be shared with us, but our regulations are clear in terms of asking the transporter, the regulated party, to report to us those instances.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Nix, I'd like to turn to you. Of course, since the ministerial mandate letter at the beginning of this Parliament, your agency has had a lot of time to consider this question, the policy implications of it. You've talked about the consultations. We also, in the meantime, have two bills. We have C-355, which is before this committee right now, but we also have a bill from Senator Delfond in the Senate. So we have two different legislative approaches, private bills that are looking at this. I guess my question to you is, in all of the time that the department has had to consult the major stakeholders and really dive into the implications of this, the implications of the ministerial mandate letter, and now you've got two bills. What was AAFC's preferred policy approach in dealing with this, in executing the ministerial mandate letter? Do you see like a path through C355? Is that what the department was considering? Was it Bill S270, or was it something completely different? I think we as committee members would really like to be able to judge this piece of legislation to what the department itself was considering.
Thank you very much for the question. I mean, as I noted in my opening remarks, I mean, this is a complex issue, and as you've stated, we've spent a considerable amount of time studying it, talking to stakeholders. In the intervening period, obviously, we have this bill in front of us, and so we've turned our attention to watching its progression through the parliamentary process, understanding the impacts that it potentially could have should it be the will of Parliament that it passes, and being ready to provide advice to the government on how to implement it in such a way that mitigates any unintended consequences.
So, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to be clear on this. You have been observing this bill's progress through the parliamentary progress. It's still very early. Is that to say that AAFC, in the meantime, had not developed its own draft legislation or was not considering that? You were going to rely purely on a private member's bill for executing a ministerial mandate later? I just want to be clear on that.
Well, thank you for the question. And to be clear, we had spent, since the mandate commitment was given in December of 2021. We spent the time doing our due diligence to better understand the sector, to better understand the implications of a ban, to meet with implicated stakeholders. And in that intervening period, the bill in question today was tabled. And so we've turned our attention to following that bill, understanding the implications so that we're better able to provide advice to the government should it be the will of Parliament to have it implemented.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, colleagues. So the vote is going to happen momentarily. I'll seek your guidance in this. It has been suggested to me that we allow every member to vote virtually, and when we're satisfied that everyone has cast their vote and we're good, that we could proceed just while we have officials here to be efficient with our time. Is that how we would like to proceed on a UC basis? Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, we'll do that. The vote is now up. I'll give everyone a couple minutes, and we'll confirm people have voted, and we'll proceed from there. We're going to suspend for 2 minutes, and we'll come back. confirm with everyone that you've had a chance to vote? Looking around the table. Monsieur Parent, tout est okay? Okay. Colleagues, we'll continue then with everyone's consent. We're all good? Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Steinley for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I was just going to make a quick comment on one of the points Mr. McGregor made about the 20 veterinarians that sent a letter to this committee. Of those 20 veterinarians, actually only 2 of them were not small animal vets. The other 18 were vets of cats and dogs. So I'm not sure when we look at that is exactly the point was being made, but I wanted to just make everyone aware that a lot of those vets don't actually work with horses or large animals. I do want to focus my comments around consultations because Ms. Nick said she consulted with the provinces. I was wondering, who has consulted with Indigenous producers like the members of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and who will be disproportionately affected if this bill is put through?
Thank you for the question, and Mr. Chair, we at the department we have consulted both with the Métis National Council as well as the Manitoba Métis Federation. In addition, we have consulted with one Métis producer in the province of Alberta. We've also consulted extensively with government officials from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. As I noted in my opening remarks, with exporters, feedlot operators, freight forwarders, and animal welfare consultants.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What was their input? What did the Métis Nation breeders in Alberta say? Did they support this bill or not?
They appreciated that there was an Indigenous component to this, that a number of Indigenous people participate in this industry. I think there wasn't a strong sense of an understanding of the order of magnitude of how many Indigenous people participate in this industry. Obviously, there was concerns with...
I don't have a lot of time. I appreciate you tap dancing, but was it a yes or no? Did they support this bill or not?
I would say they raised concerns with this bill.
Thank you very much. I'll move to the CPSA, and my colleague talked about some of the onerous tasks that are going to be foisted upon you. Did the government consult with CPSA at all on this bill, and are they aware of how much more responsibility CPSA is going to have if this bill goes through? And is there a cost with that? How much extra cost would that be if this bill goes through for all the extra work you're going to have to do?
Thank you very much for the question. Mr. Chair, I would say we've had ongoing discussions for almost the past year with both representatives from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as well as CFIA. Because this is a private member's bill, the CPSA was not consulted specifically on the language within the bill, but we have been consulting closely with the department and the agency, in particular since the bill has been tabled in looking at how we would start to administer such a framework as described within this particular bill. It's really difficult right now for us to determine what the costs would be associated for implementation of this at the agency. Some of it's going to be just what this does to the market itself, right? If the bill does have the effect of reducing the number of live export of horses, obviously that would factor into the amount of resources CBSA would need to apply in order to enforce this legislation as drafted. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but that's work that's still in very early days. There's an 18-month implementation of the bill, so once it receives royal assent as drafted, it wouldn't come into force for the following 18 months. We would anticipate concluding that work during that period in terms of understanding how this would be enforced at the border.
Thank you for that. And I just do a follow-up, but there's going to be many other horses that are transported still, if it's not for slaughter, like for sports, for athletic events, Olympics, for showing, for breeding purposes as well. So that will, with the extra onus on your employees, that will have a large effect, and they will be needing to do a lot more. Do you believe it's in 18 months they would be equipped to handle these extra tasks? Because horses will still be transported, just not one specific area, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think Ms. Nix quoted some of the stats earlier in her testimony in terms of the thousands of horses that are exported annually. This is something that we would continue to work through and to try to determine how our resources are allocated against this new enforcement priority for the agency.
You did mention about 10,000 horses are exported down to the States each year, not for various other reasons. Is there data points on how many injuries have happened with those animals being exported by truck and trailer?
On this particular one, I would defer to my colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't actually have that the information in front of me. I'm happy to take that back to the department and see if we do have information on injuries sustained in.
I appreciate that. If you could bring it back so the committee could see that, it'd be an interesting way to compare.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Steinley. Thank you, Ms. Nix. We'll now turn it back to the Liberal side. Mr. Lewis or Mr. Carr?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate everyone's patience through our voting, and it's appreciated. I also appreciate my Conservative colleagues comparing horses to other companion animals, like cats and dogs. And that's one of the reasons that Bill C-355 is a standalone bill, specifically targeted to end the practice and ban the export of live horses for slaughter, not affect any other sector whose contributions, putting food on the table, I fully support. So I would like to direct my questions to Dr. Ireland, no stranger to this committee, from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. I'm so used to saying CFIA that I can't say the full thing. There is a big difference between the conditions horses exported live for slaughter are in versus breeding horses, racing horses, horses for riding or pleasure, or just horses for non-competitive entertainment. My understanding is there's only one airline left that will still do the export of live horses for slaughter. The other airlines are no longer interested in doing that. Is there any way that exporting live horses for slaughter could be mistaken for exporting of breeding horses or racing horses or horses riding for pleasure or competition?
Sure, I'll take that for my colleague, Dr. Ireland. Mr. Chair, the standards and requirements are the same. They're laid out in legislation. Our veterinarians apply them every day. They speak to stocking density. They speak to the conditions of the animals in transport. Whether, as a question came earlier, individual exporters are exceeding those or not, because they're simply not moving as many animals, that is certainly a possibility.
I appreciate that answer, and that is a distinction, right? You're saying the standards are the same, and if there's, that's what this bill is doing, is changing legislation to change this practice. The conditions don't necessarily have to be the same. Would you say that the conditions for, we'll hear from Racetrack Canada, Equestrian Canada coming up, those conditions, those are quite different in transporting horses?
Well, I think I would come back to, the legislation exists that allows permitted activities. Our veterinarians are there to monitor that every day. As my colleague has said, Mr. Chair, our veterinarians are there on the farm when the loads are prepared. They're there at the airport when the trucks arrive, the crating of the animals, up to the final loading of the aircraft. As we've touched on earlier, any significant events causing death or mortality are reported back to us. So I would say our veterinarians apply those regulations fairly and transparently. I think our veterinarians do a very good job of balancing the legislative requirements, their own professional ethics and beliefs, with the default being the protection of the horses that are traveling by air.
You say that the CFIA has no control. You're saying once the plane lands in another country, but would this be, does the CFIA accompany the planes overseas, or is it more like when wheels are up, at that point the CFIA has no way of knowing other than an honor system, it sounds like. It sounds like the exporters are supposed to report injuries. Is that correct? There's no way of verifying it other than an honor system?
Certainly our expectation that those incidents are reported to us. The commercial shipments that go by air are accompanied by a member of the industry who has care and control of the horses, so they're certainly there to monitor the condition of the horses. I think, as Dr. Ireland has said, Mr. Chair, it is a very multi-step, complex activity where CFIA interacts routinely with industry, the people that are involved in this.
But it still truly is an honor system. You have to wait to be told. There's no other way of verifying if a horse were injured during flight.
It's a legislative requirement for them to report.
Right, but it's not enforceable. I mean, you're enforcing exporting at this point, and I'm just looking for. This is a long journey for a horse to go, thousands of kilometers, and it seems like about 95% of it is unattended and not overseen, which is something that this legislation, if this practice were banned, would fix that. And that's no shot at what you're doing. You're there during many stages of this, but it sounds like when wheels are up, that's the end of what our country can do as far as enforcing this. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The legislation certainly covers the entire journey, sets that feed, water, and rest interval at 28 hours, sets a reporting requirement on the industries involved, I think, as we've said, regardless of end use. So that's certainly currently our legislative requirement, and we would expect industry to comply with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. James Davies. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30.
Now, Mr. Perron, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I want to come back for the CFIA people. We talk about transportation conditions and the regulations. Your regulations are well controlled, but with so many complaints and presentations of many people on air transport of animals, should the CFIA maybe improve the transportation standards? Have you already worked at that as a committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, the regulations were amended and published in Canada Gazette 2 in 2019, coming into force in 2020. And they reflected at the time best available science, information, stakeholder feedback. As a regulatory authority and as a science-based organization, we certainly continue to monitor information, science, and if we consider the regulations to be outdated or requiring additional measures, we would always contemplate that. We would consider the additional information and make amendments if appropriate. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour la réponse.
Thank you very much for this clear answer, which is highly appreciated. In Bill C-355, if it were to be adopted, we would ask people who are exporting people for other ends than slaughter to give a certificate that proves this. If I've understood the opening statements, this certificate already exists, so would that really add a large administrative burden?
We obviously are following the bill as it moves through the process, and we'll discuss implementation. The agency will work towards the full implementation of any new rules or laws that fall within our mandate.
Merci beaucoup. C'est quand même, moi, j'ai...
Thank you very much. Maybe with my last 5 seconds, Mr. Chair, I want to give a question, because in the minister's mandate letter, it includes to use this. So why are we going through a private member's bill, which proceeds much more slowly? We'll ask questions next to the next guest. Thank you. Maybe that's part of the comments. Maybe it's an open question. Mr. McGregor, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Nix, I'd like to turn to you, and it's just drilling down into your consultations. So we heard last year's export was approximately 2,600 horses at a value of approximately $19 million. How many farms or individual breeders are those 26 horses coming from?
Thank you for the question. And Mr. Chair, I believe it's somewhere in the order of about 350 different individual breeders.
Approximately 350. And out of those 350, does the department have a breakdown on whether these horses, these horse exports for slaughter, are their primary source of income or a secondary source of income? Do you have those figures?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I don't have the specific figures in front of me. From our consultations, our understanding is that the majority of them, the export is a secondary to their overall farming business.
And is their overall farming business, are they raising other animals primarily?
Horses and possibly other animals.
So the majority are using this as a secondary income source stream.
That's our understanding from the consultations that we've conducted.
And do you have an approximate number on how many are identifying as Indigenous versus non-Indigenous?
From our consultations with industry, we estimate that somewhere between 15 and 25% are Indigenous, representing about 40% of the horses that are being exported for slaughter.
Okay. And you said the consultations and the reaction to the bill were, quote, difficult, I think. What kind of, if this bill is going to come to pass, are options being explored for a transition phase that would allow them to move to other areas of animal husbandry and so on?
Thank you for the question. I would say, Mr. Chair, that as the committee knows, this appeared in the Minister of Agriculture's mandate letter commitment in December of 2021, and as my colleague from the CBSA has already noted, as it's currently drafted, there's an 18-month implementation period before it comes into effect.
Thank you. And just one final question, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, Ms. Nix, on if the department could formally table with this committee a summary of those consultations so that we as committee members can use that to better inform ourselves about this bill.
I can take that back, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the first panel. A couple issues of housekeeping. You would have received from the clerk proposed budget for both this study, C355, and also the horticulture sector. Would be seeking unanimous consent to approve the budget as distributed. Seeing no opposition, I'd also just like to recognize my good maritime colleague, Mr. Long from St. John Rosse, who has joined us, graced us with his presence here today on the Agriculture Committee. There you go. Okay, thank you to our officials for joining us here today and for your work on behalf of all Canadians. Colleagues will suspend just for 2 or 3 minutes to bring up the next panel. Thank you. Mr. Carr. I'll get you and the Tories to hush up here so we can move on with this meeting. I said Mr. Carr and my good Tories. So we're going to move forward, colleagues. We've got today from Animal Justice as part of the second hour panel, Ms. Caitlin Mitchell, who is the Director of Legal Advocacy. So welcome. Thank you for being here with us in person in Ottawa. From Equestrian Canada, we have Melanie McLaren, who is Director of Marketing and Communications, joining us by teleconferences. Welcome, Ms. McLaren. And from Racetracks of Canada Incorporated, Ms. Catherine Curry, who is the President. Thank you so much for also being here. 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we're going to turn it over for questions. We will have to handle some votes in the back half, so hopefully we can continue to work on good UC and keep moving forward. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell, for up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee today to speak to this incredibly important issue. As Canada's leading national animal law organization, Animal Justice wholeheartedly supports Bill C-355, which would end the export of live horses from Canada for slaughter overseas. This is a relatively new practice, which appears to have started less than 20 years ago when an American company relocated to Western Canada. Exporting live horses to Japan for slaughter causes significant and unnecessary suffering to horses. For this reason, the vast majority of Canadians from all provinces and of all political stripes support a ban on this practice. Horses shipped to Japan for slaughter endure an extremely long and stressful journey, are subjected to conditions that are much worse than those in which sport and show horses are transported to and from events. I've observed these shipments with my own eyes many times at the Winnipeg airport and have watched as workers jab horses with poles to get them off the trucks, and have seen them loaded into small wooden crates, barely larger than their bodies. Once they're in these open-sided crates, they wait on the noisy airport tarmac to be loaded onto their planes, even during frigid winter temperatures. In contrast, Air Canada's equine transport service ships a maximum of 18 horses per flight, ensuring spacious conditions and humane conditions for transport. Horses transported for slaughter are often loaded onto flights that carry 100 or even more horses at a time. You heard a lot this morning about how the rules are the same, but in practice, the conditions are different. The committee has before it clear and compelling scientific evidence showing that the way that horses are exported for slaughter, the way that they are treated is completely unacceptable and puts them at risk of fear, panic, extreme thirst, hunger, and fatigue, injury, and illness. Some have even died en route. Tragic incidents of horses dying during transport or becoming seriously injured are deeply concerning and highlight the dangerous nature of this practice. But I want to be clear that even when horses survive the journey without any apparent injuries, their welfare can still be severely compromised, as the expert evidence before you clearly shows. These are animals with a high center of gravity, highly sensitive hearing, strong flight instincts. Recent scientific research shows that even short road trips of 3 or more hours can affect horses' endocrine and immune function. So the time to end this practice is now. I've heard some committee members suggest that our existing laws are enough to protect horses exported for slaughter, but as an animal protection lawyer, I would like to be absolutely clear that that's not the case. Provincial animal welfare laws and the federal criminal code are seldom used in the agricultural context. They're primarily applied when someone is deliberately cruel to an animal, such as beating an animal or starving them. Suffering caused by standard industry practices, including transport overseas, is exempt. The health of animals regulations prohibit transporting horses for more than 28 hours without food, water, and rest. But even that meager limit is not always enforced. Just this week, Animal Justice was in court in Winnipeg, where a judge agreed to lay a charge against a horse export company for a shipment that went well over the legal limit and during which at least 3 horses collapsed. Yet the CFIA refused to take enforcement action. We calculate how long these horses are denied food and water and rest based on when the plane touches down in Japan, as if the second that they land, they're given food and water and they can immediately rest. But of course, we know that's not the case. The reality is the horse's journey is far from over at that point. After the dozens of horses are unloaded from the planes, taken out of their crates, they're loaded onto trucks, and then they are transported to quarantine facilities. The fact is, I don't know how long that journey takes. So we simply do not know how much longer the journey goes after the plane touches down, but it raises serious concerns that many of these shipments may actually go over the 28-hour limit. I urge you to support Bill C-355 and bring our laws in line with the values of Canadians. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. We'll now turn to Ms. McLaren. I hope I'm saying that, McLaren. Over to you with Equestrian Canada for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, McLaren is correct. So I'd like to also begin by expressing my gratitude to the opportunity to address the committee. As the governing body for equestrian sport and industry in Canada, we wholeheartedly support initiatives aimed at safeguarding the health and welfare of horses. However, we do believe that certain aspects of the bill require careful consideration to avoid unintended consequences for an important sector of our equine industry. We would like to highlight the importance of defining the term export as it pertains to the transport of horses, and I know this has been discussed at length at the committee today. However, it is important to distinguish, perhaps in the preamble or other definitions, that air travel is utilized for horses for other purposes in the sports sector. The transportation of sport horses by air for competition, sales, training is an integral part of equestrian sport and standard practice for other national equestrian organizations represented in our voting membership in the breed sector. Travel difficulties can be a source of stress, and mitigating any delays in ensuring smooth transport for horses that are legitimately traveling for sport is a horse welfare issue. If there were some delays that are forced by this legislation on horses, it could be a significant deterrent for our horses legitimately traveling for sport. We'd like to stress the distinction between the horses up for slaughter and those involved in sport and breeding. We would like that the ambiguous language, it could hinder legitimate transportation, and we want to ensure that it does not impact the equestrian community negatively. We're asking also that there be some consideration for a comprehensive transition plan if this were to go ahead. Our jurisdiction only covers active equines in Canada, and that is those involved in sport and recreation activities. But we do have concerns under our fundamental values of our organization around the love of horses and the requirements for us to advocate for the welfare of horses in the lives of all Canadians. We acknowledge that the bill's intent is to protect horse health, but we would like to emphasize the need to recognize implications of welfare and equine care without forethought and planning. The necessity of implementing a comprehensive plan to support the industry's transition away from the export for slaughter practice is highly important. The importance of avoiding unnecessary pain and suffering for the horses that will be affected by the transition. And we would like to propose a transition plan that would include financial support, education, and resources for those horse owners, breeders, and stakeholders that are involved in the current industry. We are open as an organization and willing to play a supportive and consultative role in this, where horses could be transitioned to other purposes such as sport or recreation. This transition plan should aim to protect and care for horses that are affected by this transition. And we would like to appreciate and let everyone know that we understand that this is around dedication to animal welfare, and it is reflected in the bill, and that the passionate response that led to it and the measures to eliminate the export of horses for slaughter we are in support of. However, we would like to advocate for a more nuanced approach that includes clarifying language, especially to highlight the diverse uses of horses traveling by air, and also to highlight the fact that there are potential unintended consequences of immediately ending an industry without the proper support. We believe that a balanced approach is necessary to safeguard horse welfare overall and in a variety of circumstances. I'd like to thank the committee's time and attention to this and express my trust in the careful consideration of all aspects, including considerations that we've brought forward as the bill progresses through the legislative process, and encourage continued efforts to promote animal welfare while maintaining a balanced approach to the challenges faced by our equine community.
Thank you very much. thank you. We'll now turn to Ms. Curry for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to speak to you today with respect to Private Members Bill 355. I'm the president and chair of Racetracks of Canada. We're an industry association that represents the 30 racetracks, both standardbred and thoroughbred, and one quarter horse track in Ajax, across this country. And our mandate is to further the interests of the horse racing industry and advocate for racetrack operations across Canada. Canada's horse racing industry represents $5.7 billion in annual GDP, employs over 47,000 people, and has over 45,000 active horses in the industry. We unequivocally support Bill C-355. Racetracks absolutely do not condone the slaughter of horses, and in fact, each track has programs in place to prevent this procedure and this practice with respect to racehorses. Having said that, we want to ensure that there's no impact caused by Bill C-355 with respect to the ability to transport horses into and out of the country for racing purposes. It may be as simple as a sentence in the bill that exempts either horses being transported for sport or horses being transported for horse racing purposes. I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll turn right over to questions. We're going to start with, I believe, Mr. Barlow for up to 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. Maybe just to Equestrian Canada first. You were talking about concerned about the unintended consequences of Bill C-355. You were talking about the potential consequences. What would be the financial implications of this if this bill were to pass unamended when you're talking about the impact it could have on breeding, on horses coming to and from Canada for events, festivals, shows? Have you any data on what the financial implications of this could be?
We haven't looked at the financial, so I can't give you a number. However, I do know that based on the number of, we have 15,000 members that are actively competing in horse sport in Canada as well as internationally. We have 1,200 FEI athletes. Those are those that compete on the international stage, and they are the ones that are typically transporting their horses for sport purposes. So, and that happens multiple times throughout the year, depending on where they're going for competition. However, from a breeding standpoint, our breed sector, as well as anyone that is doing training or other breeding, those numbers would be much higher in terms of who are bringing horses in via air for those reasons. I think that there's not a number that we can put on it other than for us, the main focus is around the horse welfare as well, that it could stop and cause concern on the airport grounds. If that's hindering a horse from traveling to an event, that can have unintended consequences as well at the events themselves, potentially stopping an athlete from going to a competition that they need in order to qualify for Olympic Games, as an example, in this year. There are so many unintended consequences that are not about the dollar value for us. However, that would be significant, but I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Thank you. I know that's hopefully, if you are able to do that, that would be helpful for that data. But you kind of lead it to my next question. I have Spruce Meadows in my riding. I have the Calgary Polo Club in my riding. What would be the impact, again, if this is not amended, in terms of international competitions where you have horses from around the world coming to our ridings across Canada to show and compete? In your opinion, would this be an impediment to those international and national competitions, but with international competitors not wanting to come to Canada to deal with the additional hoops they'd have to go through?
Yes, 100%. We've had this instance, in fact, recently where we were trying to host a Nations Cup event at Bromont in Quebec, and we, in terms of not we hosting it, but we were helping with the sanctioning and the support of one of our big event venues, and we had some challenges with the ability for teams from different countries to be able to come in due to some legislation. And we also experienced this where the teams are not willing to come because they're concerned about what would happen when they leave. This would be the identical situation where there would be some potential for countries not wanting to come, athletes not wanting to come if they felt that they might get stuck or have concerns exporting their horse, leaving the country. A lot of times people who are going to international competitions such as those at Spruce Meadows, they would be coming from a variety of different areas and potentially going directly to another area in the world.
Thanks, Ms. McLean. I've got a limited amount of time, and I just have a couple other questions to ask. I guess really quickly, if you can answer this quickly, we've had some discrepancy between the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the proponent of this bill, and I'm certain the comments from Animal Justice, is there are different standards for horses that are being transported by air, if that horse is being transported for slaughter or being transported for other events. Is that an accurate statement? Are the standards the same regardless of what the end use of that animal is?
I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in being able to answer that question. All I know is how our horses are transported, and I can't speak to the differences. However, I can speak to the fact that most people are not aware of how those transports happen, and that is one of our major concerns, is if the language is not clear in this legislation, things could be misinterpreted, and that is one of our biggest concerns with the way that this has been written.
Thanks. I appreciate that. To Ms. Mitchell, thanks for coming. You were very adamant that the standards are different, but CFIA was here saying the standards are exactly the same. Do you have proof that CFIA is judging one animal differently than the next when they are inspecting those loads before they leave?
I think it's really important to clarify. I absolutely did not say that the standards, the law is different. The law is the same, the health of animals.
But you were saying that they were judging those things differently when the rules are the same. So you were agreeing with that, yes?
Absolutely. The health of
you were
animals
saying they were being
regulations
enforced differently by CFA depending on what the end use is.
No, I'm not talking to the CFA's enforcement. What I'm talking about actually is just the way and practice that individuals ship these horses. So my understanding, and you know, our two witnesses here could probably speak to this, whether they would ship, say, 100 horses in 3 to 4 at a time in small wooden crates on one plane for, say, a sporting event, I'd be quite surprised. I've never seen any documentation of that, and I actually have seen a fair bit of footage and also photos of many different ways that these horses are transported.
Okay, but you're saying you'd be surprised, but you don't have the CFIA is the science-based department, and they're saying the standards are the same. Just really quickly, does 355 ban the slaughter of horses in Canada?
No, Bill C-355 will not impact our domestic horse slaughter industry. It's specifically focused on the export of horses for slaughter overseas. And
are you opposed to the transportation of horses or other animals for any other reason other than the horse slaughter? Are you fine with transporting show horses by air, cattle by truck? Are those also issues that you support or oppose?
We're at time, but Ms. Mitchell, I'll give you time to respond.
Yeah, I guess I'd have trouble answering that question quickly because you listed a bunch of different types of transport there. I try to take a very science-based position based on the facts, and so what I can say is that the way that these specific horses are exported is completely unacceptable and does cause significant suffering.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Carr for up to 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Mitchell, welcome here. Thanks so much for being here, as well as to our other witnesses. I was a little bit concerned with a couple of components of the testimony offered by Dr. Ireland and folks from CBSA and Agriculture Canada. Specifically, the word expectation came up a lot. But to Mr. McGregor's question, I did not hear a lot that would satisfy, I think, a response in regards to whether or not there is an enforcement mechanism or a reporting mechanism that is in place. It kind of makes me think as an educator of we send our kids to camp and we say, okay, we woke up in the morning, everything was good, we got them dressed, we packed their bag, the lunches were there, we had the emergency contact number, but then we never heard from anybody. at camp. Now, of course, the difference is these kids would come back from camp and the horses don't come back from camp. But the point I'm trying to make is that it seems as though we're talking about things being done right up until a certain point. And I think that my colleague from the Bloc, Monsieur Perron, asked a very interesting question in terms of whether there was a difference in the regulations for those traveling for slaughter versus those traveling for show. The difference, of course, is that show horses or those participating in other activities are going to come back. Once these horses get to Japan, for example, they are being fattened up intentionally, and we don't seem to have any reporting mechanism. I take it that our Canadian regulators are saying that there are rules in place for once the horse lands in Japan. I'm still not convinced, based on the word expectation alone, that is actually happening in accordance with the law. But then once the horse moves out of the site and the control of Canadian legislation and into the Japanese market, for example, we don't really seem to know. Can you elaborate at all on what we do know from the Japanese side of things, or any other country receiving a Canadian horse for export, in terms of how they're treated and what that looks like?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know too much. As you point out, and we heard this morning, the CFIA certainly, they're at the airport, and I've reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of ATIP request documents that show what we do know about them in transport. So if at the end of the journey, the flight lands and there is a horse that is dead, or there is a horse that has collapsed, and they are still down, of course, we don't know if they collapsed before the end, but that information is reported back to the CFIA, and we reviewed it. But that's about where it ends. As I said, we don't know how long it takes to unload the horses. We don't know, how many of them develop some of the illnesses that experts have flagged with this committee, how many of them develop pleuropneumonia or shipping fever, how many develop colic, how many have their immune systems or their endocrine systems impacted by this journey. We simply don't know. So, I think expectations, I agree with you, is a really concerning word, because once the horses are in Japan, it's a bit of a black hole.
Yeah. I think, again, part of the focus of the argument from some of my colleagues who oppose the legislation, again, has been around the Canadian side. And I think it's fair that they are speaking to certain regulatory components that exist within Canadian legislation, but that completely ignores the second half of the process, which is that we are where the horse originates, where the animal is ultimately being provided the opportunity through this legislation to get into the hands of a foreign market and then out of our control. So I think that it's concerning to me that we're not spending more time talking about what's happening to these animals once they get to their ultimate destination, because we don't simply have, I think, the moral or ethical capacity to raise our hands and say, well, we did everything right on our side, but now that they're over there, it's up to the Japanese or whichever other receiver of those animals to decide how they're going to be treated. I think that it simply speaks to us doing a part of our role. I do want to turn quickly to another thing, though. Some of my colleagues have poked at me a little bit and said, Ben, this is not something that matters to people. You're just bending to the will of animal rights advocates. Ms. Mitchell, you're actually a constituent of mine. I'm wondering if you could speak to the degree to which you hear in our riding of Winnipeg South Centre a concern from the people that are your neighbors, your friends, your family, and the people I represent in relation to this particular practice.
Absolutely. As you point out, it is a matter that I think a huge number of Canadians, and polling supports this, a huge number of Canadians are concerned about. I think you're right. Folks in our riding, certainly, I've spoken to many of them, have expressed concern. My understanding is that this is an issue that crosses political boundaries, too. So, I think probably folks in many of the Conservative members' ridings as well have some concern. So, again, I think the science is there. I think public opinion is there. And so it's very much my hope that we'll see this bill move forward.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Colleagues, I'm going to have to jump out of the chair here in a minute, but I am going to turn it over to Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît, and you'll be in good hands with Mr. Barlow.
Merci.
Thank you. Chair, thank you for the witnesses for being here with us, especially Ms. Mitchell. Thank you for having accepted the invitation. I'm sorry to see you in person the only day when I'm not there, so I consider yourself to be greeted in person. So I will start with questions. We talk about the transport conditions, and that's determined by CFIA, but those who transport animals for other uses take more precautionary measures. But CFIE said that the transportation standards were revised in 2019 and applied in 2021. Did this improve the situation?
When the regulations were revised in 2019, there were some improvements. I would probably describe them as modest improvements. We still have some of the worst animal transport standards in the Western world, but now the limit is 28 hours and not 36. But, you know, really the focus on only that time doesn't address so many other issues for these horses. You know, we don't have temperature requirements, for instance, or really much in the way of detail in terms of how they're transported. So there are others, like Air Canada, for instance, that have taken steps to really heighten those standards and make sure that the welfare of horses is protected above and beyond what our very limited regulations require.
OK, donc c'est inégal.
So it's not the same everywhere, it's unequally applied. So what we want to do is to ban transportation for one use. I'm not going to talk about the emotional level. Horses have a different status than other animals that are slaughtered. Is the solution not to review the transportation conditions? So say tomorrow morning we would guarantee that horses that were transported, regardless of for what purpose, would have the same conditions that those who are transported for competitions. Would that satisfy you or not?
I think I'd have to look at the specific proposal. What I would say is that even just based on geography, we're talking about feedlots that are located, I'm from Manitoba, so I'll focus on Manitoba. That specific feedlot is located at least 5 hours from the airport. So to get horses, dozens, if not more than 100 horses at a time from that feedlot to the Winnipeg airport in all seasons, summer, winter, load them on planes, and then they have to land before they cross the ocean to refuel. So this is an incredibly long journey. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's only so much we can do to minimize suffering if we're accepting that that is a journey these horses are going to take, and that they are going to take it not one or two at a time, but hundreds, well, more than 100, I shouldn't exaggerate, up to about 110 or so at a time. So I can't foresee a way to create regulations that would allow for that to happen without causing suffering, and to ensure, furthermore, that there are contingency plans in place so that even if unforeseen circumstances arise, that over that entire journey, very complicated, very long, they will absolutely be protected.
OK. Merci.
Thank you for your answer. So I understand that we could consider that, but it wouldn't really be that satisfactory for you. You mentioned in your introduction earlier the unnecessary suffering of the horses during transportation. Even a short road trip for 3 hours, there can be problems. So transporters and standards, the standards are there in order to avoid animal suffering as much as possible. And my question, Ms. Mitchell, concerns the precedents. Say 355 were adopted. What precedent will it create? Because other animal species may also have difficulty during transportation. So could we not see ourselves running a race towards a ban on exporting animals? We export pork, we export beef, we export various species. What do you think of that?
A few times before the committee, the kind of slippery slope argument, what's next? And what I would say is that this bill is very targeted to one very specific practice. I have seen no evidence to suggest that there is a real risk of any slippery slope here. And the bill is really science-based. You know, we're talking about horses who have very unique physiology, and we're talking about a very, very specific type of transport, which the scientific evidence again shows us is causing harm and suffering. So with respect, I really don't see any risk here of a slippery slope, and banning this one specific practice will not adversely affect any other agriculture industry in Canada.
Vous pensez pas que ça peut nous...
And you don't think that it would lead to requests in a year or two to cease the slaughter of horses in Canada, for example, if we don't talk about other species very quickly?
Really a question there.
Sure. I guess quickly I'll just repeat what I said earlier, which is, I mean, this specific bill will not impact our domestic horse slaughter industry. Folks, have been raising concerns about that industry for years, but I really see that as a completely separate discussion.
Merci, Monsieur Perron. Now, colleagues, we do have a vote in about 14 minutes here, so just looking for unanimous consent. Again, that we'll just vote by app, and we'll try and I'll give you guys a warning at a couple of minutes. Then we may have to. We'll get your 6 minutes in, no problem, Alistair. So unanimous consent to carry on, and we'll vote by the app. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Mitchell. And in your capacity as the Director of Legal Advocacy, well, first of all, I've been very interested in just trying to see the different legal forms this policy position would take. So we have Mr. Lewis and the bill before the committee. We have Senator Dalfond in the Senate with Bill S-270. I did ask the department whether they had made any legislative forays, but they had not yet arrived at that position. So it would have been interesting to have seen what the department came up with in terms of legislation. But I'm just wondering, from your legal expertise, Mr. Lewis has taken the route of creating a standalone federal act. There's some pretty detailed requirements for declarations and so on, whereas Senator Dalfond decided to take a route where he's amending an existing act, the Health of Animals Act, and his bill is actually quite simple. It's just simply no person shall export from Canada a horse or other equine for slaughter. I'm just wondering if you could just inform the committee of your opinion of the different approaches and just to help us better understand, whether amendments might be necessary, what legal route, in your opinion, might be the best way.
Sure. So I fully support the bill as drafted. That said, I fully supported Senator Dalfond's bill, and I think I was quite vocal at the time when he introduced it to that effect. I am aware that there are other requirements around paperwork when you're exporting horses. So my hope would be that this declaration could be fit into the existing scheme without adding too much for folks that we've heard from today who are exporting horses for other reasons. But as I've said in my written brief, and I'm happy to give more information. I think you could also amend the bill and take out the declaration requirement entirely and still see the end goal the same, and that's really what we're concerned about. These shipments, as I said, it's not one horse at a time or two horses at a time. We're talking about huge shipments of horses leaving airports in Western Canada, generally by Korean Air Cargo. So I think if there was a ban in place, I can't see those shipments continuing to leave. It really wouldn't be a concern for me. So whether it's the bill as drafted or whether it's a pared-down version of it without the specific paperwork requirements, if those are concerning, I don't know. I think either would be fine.
Thank you. And I want to turn my next question to Equestrian Canada. I was listening to the opening statement just about your concern about unintended consequences of this bill and the delays that might come up. So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if competitors from foreign jurisdictions are visiting Canada with their show horses, with their competition horses, you're worried that those horses, even though they're not originally from Canada and they're here for a competition, they may be caught by also having to sign paperwork, even though at first glance it's quite obvious that horse is not designed for slaughter. Am I reading you right, or can you go into a little bit more detail? Because I think I'm really trying to explore as to what specific amendments might be necessary from your point of view.
Yeah, I think it's any additional administration that's required that might, in the case of foreigners coming and then having to export their horses out, any delays that might be caused due to either a misunderstanding or, I mean, as we've been discussing, that the number of hours that a horse might have to sit in their prescribed crates on the tarmac or in the airplane itself can cause increasing welfare concerns. So the way that the bill was written when we first read it, and I know it's gone through of some changes, but that it read very clearly that there was some sort of a letter signed by the minister that would have to be delivered directly to the pilot. There seemed to be like that was the kind of clarification that we're looking for, because any kind of delays in the moment of the transportation, delays in paperwork that might be additionally required for those coming and going, returning. The schedule would be highly affected by anyone. The types of dates that you need to be in at a different competition in order to give the horse time to acclimate to the new location. There are many, many different consequences that I could go through different scenarios, but one that you mentioned is one of them.
I just want to get one more question to you, if I can. So you also mentioned that you'd like to see a transition plan. Now, the bill as it's currently written has a coming into force section of 18 months. When it comes to a transition plan, are you asking this committee to consider an amendment that specifies a requirement for a transition plan, like with the, speaking to people who are breeding horses for slaughter, offering that financial support? Like, are you asking for that kind of specificity to be inserted into this bill as a part of a transition plan?
Well, that could be one option. I definitely think that we didn't feel that it was outlined that there would be any kind of transition plan, no form of support. Our main concern is around the horses that are currently being raised for that purpose and what will happen to them in the transition 18 months without specifying any other additional supports to us. That leaves things open for potentially other concerns to be happening that we don't think are planned for, and we want to make sure that they are. So I'm not a legislator, so I don't know what you can do to put into that, but if there were a way to indicate that it needed to be done, that would be what we would support.
Thank you, Ms. McLaren. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Now to Ms. Rood for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Mitchell, you mentioned in your comments earlier that the standards, it's different for horses going for slaughter versus those that are going for sporting events, when in fact we heard from the CFIA and the CBSA that those are exactly the same standards. So, in fact, flights do not always have to stop over for refuel. There are direct flights that go across the ocean, and I haven't seen anywhere that you've provided any new scientific data here to back up what your assumptions are. So I'm just wondering, is it fair to say that you doubt the expertise of the CFIA and Canada Border Services in regulating and enforcing the safe transport of live horses?
Thanks for the opportunity to clarify. So the regulations, the health of animal regulations, are not different for different types of export. My position and the evidence is that in practice, the way horses are exported for slaughter is different. On the point of refueling, I have never seen a shipment of horses that has left Canada for Japan that has not refueled. Generally, they refuel in Alaska. Occasionally, there are other locations. My understanding is that due to the weight of those aircrafts carrying so many horses, they do refuel If there have been examples where they haven't, I'd be very interested to see that. But certainly I've never seen an instance where that hasn't happened. And on the point of scientific evidence, I come before you as a lawyer, absolutely not a scientist. I'm the first to admit that. So what I would say is that you do have a brief before you from 34 leading veterinarians and animal welfare experts. I would commend that brief to you. We've also put forward a more extensive report that sets out some of the scientific concerns. And I would commend that to you as well.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify once again, of all of those veterinarians that signed that brief, there was only 2 that were not small animal veterinarians. The rest of them were small animal veterinarians. So it sounds like your objections to this bill, Ms. Mitchell, are not grounded in science, but rather in a love of horses. And I'm just wondering, why ban the whole practice entirely? Why wouldn't you just advocate for increasing the standards? Have you ever been on any of those flights? Have you witnessed the landing and the treatment of the horses while they're en route?
On the point of the letter signatories, my understanding is that that is incorrect, that many of those signatories do in fact have specific expertise when it comes to horses and horse welfare. There are also a number of professors from, I'm just going by memory here, I believe University of Guelph and other institutions who are themselves animal welfare experts. But in any event, I can't Google all their names at this moment, so I won't give you specifics there. And then as in terms of, whether or not to simply improve the regulations, as I mentioned earlier to MP Perron, the very nature of this transport, shipping 180, whatever the number is, horses from feedlots in very rural areas in Canada, all the way overseas, is incredibly stressful, and it's also incredibly risky for these animals, and our position is that it is unnecessary suffering.
But you don't have a problem with them being shipped over there for sporting events? Yes or no? It's a simple answer.
Well, I don't know enough about the way that they're shipped for sporting events to have a position. I do know that they're shipped in much better...
They're shipped exactly the same way that they are if they're going to slaughter, and we heard that from testimony in the previous hour.
No,
and I'd like to just point out for context, there's over 15,000 practicing veterinarians in Canada, and the letter that was submitted by 20 veterinarians to this committee, only 2 of them were equine or have experience with actual horses, and the rest were small animal vets for dogs and cats. And with my last minute, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just turn over to Equine Canada, please. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us how significant is the sale of horse livestock for processing to owners' cost recovery?
I'm sorry that I can't answer that because our jurisdiction only covers active equines in Canada, so it isn't nothing in the food sector other than sport and recreation is what our jurisdiction covers.
So you have no data to support any kind of cost recovery for your folks when these horses are at the end of their careers?
In terms of when a sport horse goes for slaughter, is that what you mean?
Yes.
No, we don't track that data in terms of what end of life plans happen for any sport horses, as typically it's done with their veterinarian, and it's not gone through the same type of
Thanks
for the horses that we're talking about
Thank
today.
you, Ms.
I'm sorry,
McLaren.
we don't cover that.
Yeah. Now, Ms. Taylor-Roy, we're going to go to you for 5 minutes. I just want to let you know we're going to be voting in about 2.5 minutes. So if everybody's okay, we'll let Ms. Taylor-Roy finish her 5 minutes and then just vote after that, if that's okay, and that'll get us close to 1 o'clock. So then I won't have to interrupt you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. So Ms. Taylor-Roy, please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for being here in person. I'm sorry I'm not there either today. But I did want to go back to some of the things that have been stated or stated as fact. My daughter is an equestrian and is familiar both with racetracks and with the competitive world. I do not know of any horse person who competes who would transport their animal, whether it's for breeding or competition, according to the standards that are set for both. Obviously, they're the same for whether it's equestrian or horses being transported for slaughter. But I don't know of anyone. And I'm just wondering, both, I know you're from the racetrack and the equine sector, whether you have ever heard of someone from that sector transporting 3 or 4 horses in a small wooden crate and going for, 28 hours without food, water, and drink. I'm wondering if you could address that. And just if you have any anecdotes, that would be great, either Mrs. McLaren or Ms. McLaren or Ms. Curry.
I can certainly answer that. I can tell you that we have about, I'll use Woodbine Racetrack as an example because that's the largest one in Canada. Generally, between 15 and 20 horses will come in to race over the course of a racing season. Usually they come in groups of 2 or 3. There are some that come in on private planes. Anyways, these horses are in padded stalls. They are bandaged up. They have straw under the horse's feet. They are given access to food and water throughout the flight. They sometimes travel with a vet the whole way. So it is a very different experience than what is being described here today.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. And how about you, Ms. McLaren? Have you? I've never seen it in my experience, but mine is limited just to my daughter's world, and I'm sure you've seen a lot more.
Yes, so I would concur with the explanation of how it was laid out. It's fairly very large areas. They are fed and they have water throughout the flight. I have loaded them personally onto their trailers on the way to the airport, and the care and concern that's done in that case, the bandaging of their legs and all of the care and concern that goes into the transportation. So absolutely 100%, it would be what she had described in terms of transportation. It would not be in cramped quarters or in wooden crates.
Great. Thank you very much. And I think, there seems to be this concentration on, the standards are the same. We understand the standards are the same. I think the question is whether the standards are humane for the transport of a companion animal, of a very sensitive, sentient animal that is being transported for their death. And when they're not cared for, when no one's at the other end to greet them or to make sure they're well, I think there's a very different standard of care applied, let's say. And I did want to just refer to, Ms. Caitlin, I was wondering if you could comment on Wheel Jill Farms. My understanding is that most of the large exporters of horses for slaughter are actually from Ontario. And although I understand that there are some Métis, some Indigenous people, farmers involved, that the bulk of the transport and the profit actually go to these farmers from Ontario, including Wheel Jill Farms. And there was a case, Bovary Exports, where CFIA had investigated. And I just was wondering if you could comment, Ms. Caitlin, on the treatment of the horses that were found, that were initially set to be exported for slaughter. But the condition they were found in and the kind of care, standard of care that was applied to those horses versus what we've just heard from both the racetrack and the equine, the sports sector.
So yes, on the question of the nature of the industry, as we've heard this morning, there are about 4 companies who are themselves exporters. They're based in Alberta and Manitoba. Now, of those exporters, my understanding, mostly actually from media articles in the Western Producer and other agricultural sources, is that there is about 2 major breeders who supply those industries, and both are in Ontario. And neither, to my knowledge, are Indigenous, though I don't doubt that there are many other breeders across the country who are Indigenous. Those 2, I do not believe, are the major breeders. As for the specific incident you're talking about, that was really quite shocking. We saw in September of 2023 that the CFIA had laid charges against Bovary Exports Limited, which of course is one of the major players in this industry. The horses involved there were originally destined for the export market, is my understanding. But because of their poor health, they were put into our domestic horse slaughter industry. But it just sounds like the conditions that they arrived in were absolutely atrocious. And I've seen the photographs myself of these horses collapsed on the ground. Some, eventually died. So, it's incredibly concerning. And, it seems like even within Canada, coming from Ontario to these feedlots in Alberta and Manitoba, there are really valid concerns about these way these animals are being treated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, thank you very much to our witnesses. We are going now to take suspend for a couple of minutes and vote, and then I don't know if we have anything, Madam Chair or Madam Clerk, we have to wrap up. So I'll just maybe end it there, colleagues, and we'll meeting adjourned, and we'll see you everybody after the break. Thanks very much.